Venom is already one of the most intimidating characters in the Marvel Universe, and now you're about to see how he becomes a literal god. It all begins with Eddie Brock, one half of the pair that forms the symbiote antihero Venom, rushing to an underground bunker with his son, Dylan. There's no time to waste as Eddie makes sure his kid is safe inside. Dylan pleads with his dad to take him with him, but Eddie knows that this is for the best as he locks the boy inside the safe room after telling him how much he loves him. You guys might be wondering, what's all the commotion about? Well, just a few minutes ago, Eddie and his symbiote senses the coming of what might be a world-ending threat. And it wouldn't be more than a few minutes after he told this to the Avengers that Captain America, Iron Man, and Captain Marvel would end up spending the entirety of Earth's first line of defense, Kree and Skrull spacecraft that Tony had repurposed to become orbital mines, as an entire horde of black and red dragons descended upon the planet's atmosphere. But it's not nearly enough for what's coming. It's not nearly enough for the arrival of the King in Black. Thousands upon thousands of symbiotic dragons make landfall and start wreaking havoc all across the world. To their credit, the Avengers tried their best and made plans to stem this invasion. They mobilized the world's street-level superheroes to help with evacuation efforts, all the while drafting individuals with electricity-based powers to counter the invading symbiotes. The Avengers knew that these interstellar creatures have few weaknesses: cosmic power, magic, and lightning and fire. Now you guys should know at this point that Thor is currently absent from all the action. Otherwise, this symbiote invasion would have ended in a matter of seconds. Kidding aside though, it's not like the world's superheroes are lacking in electricity, because somewhere else at Washington Square Park, Professor X has assembled the X-Men to help fight these planet-destroying dragons. They might not have a god of thunder right now, but they sure as hell have a great alternative who's more than worthy for the task: Storm. With all the chaos above ground, Eddie Brock, now in his Venom form, swings through the city's underbelly in hopes of finding a way to stop the coming of the King in Black. And if the Dragon Horde didn't convince you of just how much of a threat this King of Black is, then all you need to know is this: his real name is Knull, and he's literally the god of the symbiotes. Venom reaches the heart of the sewers in a leftover spire that Dark Carnage used back in the Absolute Carnage storyline to try and reawaken Knull. Venom hopes that tapping into the spire would allow him to gain control over the other symbiotes to create an army that can stand against the King in Black's Dragon Horde. But it's a long shot, so long in fact that all Eddie could muster when he connected to the spire was to become aware that Knull is about to arrive. And he didn't just bring dragons with him. He has symbiote-infested celestials as well. And seriously people, infecting a single celestial with a symbiote would be more than enough to destroy maybe an entire solar system. But 3? Knull really does have it bad for Earth. With the King in Black now in their presence, the Avengers go for a last-ditch effort to try and stop the symbiote god. They call upon Sentry, basically Marvel's version of Superman, but with a split personality disorder, to defeat Knull. Well, it almost looked like it was gonna work. Sentry easily takes down one of the symbiote celestials, but once Knull puts his hands on him, well, let's just say it didn't go well, and Knull ends up swallowing him. By the end of his confrontation with Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers got all gooed up and swallowed in the sea of hot, sticky symbiote. And to make matters worse, all it takes for the King in Black to shroud the Earth in the same tar-like stuff is a single clench of a fist. Knull then went after Storm just to make sure there aren't any more nuisances who can stop him from laying waste to Earth. Meanwhile, Venom, out of desperation, removes his link from the spire and basically announces his presence to the King in Black, knowing that Knull would want to reabsorb the Venom symbiote from him. So, just as expected, Knull arrives at Venom's location and rips the symbiote off of Eddie. But here's the whammy, guys. It turns out Knull isn't just on Earth to wreck the hell out of it, and taking the Venom symbiote from Eddie was just a sweet little bonus, because aside from the sweet feeling of laying waste to the planet, Knull's also planning on bagging himself, Dylan Brock, Eddie's half-symbiote son. Knull ends up throwing Eddie from hundreds of stories up in the sky, and his dying body crashes on the symbiote-infested streets of the city. Thankfully, the one and only friendly neighborhood Spider-Man arrives to rescue him. Before passing out, Eddie makes Pete promise to take care of his son Dylan. The King in Black senses this and reveals another ace in his hole. He didn't just swallow the other superheroes earlier, he turned them into his own symbiote-bonded soldiers. Pete himself thinks that all hope is lost, but Human Torch comes in clutch and gives them just enough time to make their getaway, in spite of the fact that Johnny knew he might die in the process. Spidey takes Eddie to one of the last remaining active strongholds of Earth's superheroes, the Fantastic Four's lab. There, Jane Foster, aka the Valkyrie, tells Pete that there's a huge chance Eddie's not gonna make it. Shortly after, the wall crawler fetches Dylan from the bunker and takes him to the Fantastic Four's lab, where the rest of the remaining heroes like Reed Richards, Sue Storm, and Black Panther are formulating a plan to stop Knull's rampage. T'Challa does everyone a solid and tells them Wakanda will stand against Knull, but he knows it's not nearly enough. They ask Jane where in the 9 realms Thor is, but even she has no idea, so they can't rely on the thunderous powers in this debacle. Meanwhile, Blade gets into an argument with Magneto and Professor X since the mutants have basically decided to cut their losses after Storm and the X-Men got bodied on the field earlier. And much to Reed Richards' annoyance, Sue reveals that she's invited Namor to the meeting. It's a good move though, because the King of Atlantis decides to offer his help in fighting the King in Black. Spider-Man asks for everyone's attention in the meantime, just to ask how Eddie's doing for Dylan's sake. And if it doesn't prove that Peter Parker's the purest superhero in all of Marvel, nothing will. But no dice. Eddie's still in critical condition. The best they can do right now is focus their attention on stopping Knull. Iron Man comes up with a plan that he can hit 2 birds with 1 stone and save Eddie's life by grabbing one of those symbiote dragons and letting him infiltrate the creature's hive mind and stop Knull when he's recovered. It doesn't take them long to mobilize too. Shortly after the meeting, Namor drafts the Black Tide to fight on his side. Blade blackmails Dracula into helping Earth, and they get in touch with Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, to conscript street-level supervillains for the war. As for Tony, he successfully uses Extremis to basically kidnap one of the symbiote dragons and transfer it to Eddie. But it doesn't work. In fact, it worsens his condition. Dylan has no choice but to reveal his symbiote powers and telepathically disintegrate the symbiote that they're trying to bond with Eddie. Reed rejoices at what this could mean for the war. Dylan's become their trump card, their super weapon, but the kid isn't thinking about that now, because in front of them, Eddie just flatlined. The rest of Earth 616's remaining superheroes scarcely have time to mourn Eddie's passing, and they proceed to mount a counteroffensive against Knull shortly after. Blade and his newly recruited vampire army fend off the infected heroes and citizens of the world, while Sue Storm barely hangs on to keep up the force field protecting them from the symbiotes. The Invisible Woman calls for Reed back at the base to proceed with the next phase of their plan: send out Dylan. Spider-Man reassures the kid that he'll stand by him regardless if he decides to go out there or not, but the boy's got beef with this interstellar plague, and in his words, he needs to hurt something. Reed assigns Spidey and Wolverine to serve as Dylan's bodyguards while they attack the infected heroes. It's not long after that when the symbiote Steve Rogers spots the kid and hurls his shield at him. But Dylan easily catches it like an absolute boss before using his symbiote powers to literally blow the black goo off the star-spangled hero, which allows Cap to regain consciousness and control. Now, since all the symbiotes are connected to Knull, the King in Black feels this and wastes no time turning his attention to Dylan. He was just about to crush Cap and the kid when a bolt of lightning pierces Knull's giant symbiote fist. And just like in the movies, Thor makes a late entrance and has us fans, not to mention Dylan and the rest of the heroes, cheer in celebration. Dylan continues blasting the symbiotes off of everyone around and tells Thor to protect him so that the boy can keep doing his job. Knull catches up to them and Thor tells the kid he's got this as the God of Thunder faces off against the God of Symbiotes in a one-on-one duel. Ultimately though, Knull gets the better of Thor and engulfs Dylan in 100% symbiote. Thor recovers and kicks the King in Black away from him and gives Knull one of the nastiest left hooks this side of superhero comics, ripping his jaw off clean. But the God of Symbiotes doesn't play fair. He calls on his 2 remaining symbiote-infected Celestials, which distracts Thor long enough for Knull to take out his sword and skewer the God of Thunder from behind. Reed does his best to keep communications open between home base and those on the field, but Iron Man tells Mr. Fantastic that he has a plan. It turns out that the symbiote dragon he caught earlier, the one injected with Extremis, can be used to basically possess other symbiote-infected creatures that Tony can control. In this case, he and the new dragon buddy took over one of the Celestials and had a fight with the other in a classic Kaiju vs. Kaiju showdown. Almost all hope seems lost for Dylan when Thor orders his ravens, Hugin and Munin, to look for one of their last remaining allies who can counter Knull's darkness. Well, lucky for Earth's mightiest heroes, they're on their way, and it's none other than the Silver Surfer. As for Dylan, he and the King in Black telepathically connect. Knull reveals that Dylan was basically born to become his antithesis, one that his rebellious children, the symbiotes themselves, created to fight against him. Little did the God of the Void know that another voice is speaking to Dylan, and it's telling the kid that there's a way he can beat Knull right then and there. The voice motivates Dylan to tap into the symbiote's hive mind through Knull to free everyone from his influence. All the while, Knull thinks he's convincing the kid to join him at his side so they can watch the world burn together. While Dylan channels his inner Deadpool and trolls Knull into thinking he's on his side, the boy touches the King in Black's hand and activates his power to link the hive mind and neutralize the symbiotes that have possessed Earth's greatest heroes. With heroes like Cyclops, Johnny Storm, and Doctor Strange back in action, the same voice telepathically speaking to Dylan reaches out to them to formulate a foolproof plan to get rid of the symbiotes terrorizing the city. In a concerted effort, the voice tells Cyclops, Sue, Strange, and Johnny to position themselves to each side of the city and release their respective powers simultaneously to drive the symbiotes to the center of the metropolis. This is followed up by a tsunami that Namor summoned when all the symbiotes have been rounded up. And just as an aside, what the hell? No one informs Spidey of this plan, so he ends up hightailing it just before the tidal wave hits. Come on. With this symbiote submerged in this water trap, Thor and Storm then shock them with lightning, one of the symbiote's weaknesses. This joint offensive proves super effective too, as Knull recoils in agony when he feels his quote-unquote children are getting killed en masse outside the symbiote bubble he created for Dylan and himself. The King in Black tries to kill the boy, but the voice finally reveals itself to be that of Jean Grey, and she comes in clutch to save Dylan. The ex-woman taps into Knull's mind to find a kink in his otherwise impenetrable armor. She sees the kind of devious crap that this so-called God of the Void has gotten himself into over the eons, from beefing with Celestials to killing other gods. Jean almost loses hope, but realizes that in a fittingly dark corner of Knull's mind, there's a weakness to the King in Black. Jean Grey calls this the opposite, something more powerful than Knull could ever be, as she recalls the King in Black is the god of darkness, but darkness has existed long before Knull, and with darkness came light. The mind-reading mutant sees visions of the past, back to a time when Knull's darkness defeated the warriors of light. At the time, the light was young, easily overwhelmed by the darkness, and stretched too thin whenever it bonded with armies assembled to fight the dark. But with time came experience, and the light learned to adapt to defeat its counterpart. Instead of bonding with numerous hosts, it started to latch itself to one being at a time. Jean is in shock to discover that this light too is a symbiote, one that serves as the god of light. She passes out not before telling Cyclops that this god of light is coming. It's trying to get in, but Knull's protective symbiote shell is blocking its path. At the same time, Silver Surfer arrives on Earth's orbit and sees the so-called God of Light. He absorbs it in his body to bypass Knull's symbiote force field and releases it when he arrives in the city. The God of Light flies out and finds a host. Meanwhile, Reed Richards reveals that their world has been well acquainted with the God of Light all this time. They just had a different name for it. They called it its former host, Captain Universe, and they called the Light the Enigma Force. Reed gets so absorbed by the discovery that he fails to notice the same bright ball flinging itself into the lab and bonding with Eddie Brock's dead body. Back in the heart of the city, Silver Surfer faces off against the King in Black, with Chrome Dome transferring his signature board into a giant sword while Knull summons a pitch black symbiote armor. Knull takes this moment to tell Norrin Rad that he's about to be placed in a body bag. but the Silver Surfer simply smirks and tells the God of Darkness that even if he does, he's not getting in alone. At that moment, all the rest of 616's heroes rally and mount a charge against Knull, with Cap shouting that trademark battle call, "Avengers, assemble!" Before they can clash though, a flash of white light bursts right in front of the combatants to reveal Venom, now the new God of Light, fully revived and ready to put his hands on his adversary. Venom in God mode is an absolute beast, so much so that he's able to wield Silver Surfer's sword and Mjolnir. Yes, the Mjolnir, and fuse the two weapons to create a gigantic battle axe that would make Ronnie James Dio smile down from metal heaven. Knull knows he's gonna get his butt kicked at this point, so he runs and Venom gives chase. The King in Black tries to throw every remaining thrall he has at this new God of Light, but Venom easily chops them like they were pieces of black kielbasa. Knull finds an opening and tries to smite Venom down, but the God of Light catches the blade with his bare hand and disintegrates it. All the while, the rest of Marvel's superheroes fight off the remaining symbiotes on the ground. In a last-ditch effort, Knull summons his last remaining celestial symbiote, but Venom lops its head off easily. The God of Light then rushes back to Knull before driving his axe's blade right in his chest and ripping off his symbiote armor. Knull tries to get into Eddie's head and tells him that he's infected Dylan with his own darkness. But at this point, Venom has had enough of the King in Black's crap, so he takes Knull's body and they fly off into orbit. Venom gives the weakened King in Black a face-melting blast of light before he drags Knull right into the sun and basically atomizes the God of Darkness. With Knull dead, the God of Light speaks to Eddie and tells him to listen to the voices of all the hosts they freed from Knull's grasp. Meanwhile, on Earth, Blade's temporary partnership with Dracula's vampires gets terminated and they turn on the Daywalker. The vamps think that they can double-cross Blade, but there's one thing that they didn't account for. It's morning, and the first rays of light instantly obliterate the creatures of the night. Silver Surfer and Thor manage to defuse Venom's axe, and they have their weapons returned to their rightful owners. Eddie returns, and everyone celebrates that they've won the war against the god of symbiotes. But there's still one problem. Knull wasn't lying when he told Eddie earlier that he infected the kid with his darkness. However, Eddie uses his newfound powers to rip Knull's remaining symbiote from Dylan's body before crushing it in his hand. With the God of Darkness fully defeated, the Enigma force unlatches itself from Eddie, effectively ending his stint as a God of Light, but not before informing him that he still has a role to play in this world. Because just as soon as the God of Light leaves Eddie's body, the symbiote hive mind starts latching onto Eddie and following him. The Venom symbiote informs him that defeating the God of the Void, Knull, and freeing all the symbiote kind from his influence has turned Eddie into the new nexus of the hive mind, the new King in Black, the new God of symbiotes.